So if you're someone who's like, I don't know where to start, I would recommend with starting with the subject that you're most familiar with, and then looking and trying to see which one of these approaches you have the least prep for. Hey teacher friends, and welcome back to That's Just Good Teaching with me, Deanna Smith, where we talk about practical and easy to implement ABAR strategies that are actually just good teaching. Let's get into it. So today we are going to talk about a highly recommended topic, and that is centers. And centers can be so powerful when you are looking to just kind of spice things up and move away from the typical direct instruction model that we see. They can be really engaging for students, but they do require some preparation, some planning. And so today I'm going to share some things that you can think through, some strategies that you can use, and some structures that you can use to make sure that your centers are highly engaging, effective, and frustration-free for you as the teacher. So let's get into it. So the first thing that you need to do to design these amazing centers is think about your structure. There's two things that you need to think about. First, are you going to have single subject centers, meaning that the center is going to be within one content area? So during math, you'll have math centers, or during ELA, you'll have ELA centers or science centers during science, like that. Or if you want to have mixed centers. So another thing that I've seen some teachers do is they have a specific part of the day where students are allowed to use the centers, but the centers could be anything. It could be math, it could be ELA, and folks rotate through the content areas. So obviously, if you're a single subject teacher, you will be able to do the mixed subject centers. If you are a single subject teacher, maybe that wouldn't make sense for you, but that is the first question to think about. I would recommend, if you are somebody who's kind of just getting started and not sure, it would be great to start with a single subject. But if you're ready for a challenge and you really want to shake things up, you can think about using a multiple subject center time as well. And how this could fit into like your instructional block in your week is if you have an afternoon or a specific time of day where you want students to really engage in something that's a little bit more interactive, a little bit more hands-on, that's when the centers would take place. So for me, when I was doing multiple subject centers, it was specifically Tuesdays and Thursdays afternoon. And that worked out in my schedule because I had to have 90 minutes of math, and then I think it was 120 minutes of ELA. So I was able to kind of double dip because kids were doing both during the center time. Or if you're doing a single subject, it can be, Friday's the center day, Monday's the center day, and you can kind of build from there. And eventually I've seen people who their entire subject is centers every day, if that's possible. So those are the two different approaches. And the first thing to think about is what subjects you will cover in the centers and how they'll be designed in your classroom. So that's the first thing. The next thing that you want to think about when you are planning out your centers is how will you use them to cover different types of content. So let's talk about the options for a little bit. One way that you could set it up is the centers can kind of be a way for students to reinforce topics or subjects that they've already covered. And so let's say you have a center, a math center, and all of the math centers are related to enforcing strategies that they've already learned. Maybe you're doing multiplication, right? And then one center is focused on multiplication using a tape diagram or an array. And then the other station is focused on multiplication using the standard algorithm. So you can kind of organize it like that to where students are just practicing things that they've already covered. Another way to organize your centers is to think about different means of engaging with the same content or the same standard. What do I mean by that? So let's say my students are focused on ratios, right? That's the standard that they're learning, 6th grade math, ratios. And so one center could be focused on review, right? Reviewing something, maybe it's skip counting or another strategy that would help them if they want to understand ratios. Maybe it's simplifying fractions, right? Some sort of other skill that's related. One center could be like hands-on, creating ratios. They're using some kind of manipulatives to create different ratios. Another center could be the computers. They're using a learning program. There's so many, like ST Math, Khan Academy, IXL, iReady, whatever it is. I'm sure your district has you using something, and they're using that and focused on that skill. And then the other center could be teacher support, right? And they're meeting, if you have a small group table or a way to pull those students, they're talking with you and kind of getting more support. That's one way that you can organize your center. So one option, just to review, is to have students engaging with the same standard in different ways, different approaches and strategies. Another way is to have students engaging with the same standard but using different tools. And then, another way is to have your centers by content area. So for ELA teachers, I've seen some teachers have, when we do ELA, our centers there is a sentence diagramming center or some sort of grammar center where they're practicing their grammar skill. And then another center is their writing center where they're working on, their opinion, fact versus opinion writing, or their narrative writing, or their topic sentence construction. And then another center is just reading. They're reading to themselves, they're reading a book that they've chosen or a Just Right book that you've chosen for them. And then another center can be focused maybe on nonfiction, right? So I'm giving a lot of examples. I hope you're not getting overwhelmed, but there are a lot of different ways to structure the centers. And so if you're someone who's like, I don't know where to start, I would recommend starting with the subject that you're most familiar with, and then looking and trying to see which one of these approaches you have the least prep for. So if you're somebody that you feel like, okay, I already know how I could break down the same subject into a couple of different centers, use that. Or if you're somebody that feels like, okay, I really have a good idea of my ELA block, and so I want to divide it into writing, grammar, reading, you could use centers for that. So that's another approach to designing your centers, and that's how you can start to decide what it will actually look like in your classroom. So the next thing that you want to think about when you are planning these centers is the logistics. How will these centers work? How are you going to make it work in your classroom? And I think that the number one thing that I see with teachers who get frustrated and move away from centers is because the layout of the center and the logistics and the rollout wasn't thought through well. So, it ends up being very chaotic for their classroom culture. And we don't want that. We want kids to be able to engage in engaging and meaningful deep learning in their centers without you having to play whack-a-mole with behavior the entire time. So what does that look like? It looks like thinking about what will the norms and expectations be for the centers and going over those as a class, and really knowing that the first couple times that you do the center, expect to have some stop and start, some practicing, some redoing, really working those norms and expectations and helping kids familiarize themselves with the expectations, because there might be a little bit of a learning curve. So that is the first one. Then you will want to think about, what will the artifact be? What will the takeaway be? Because I think sometimes in the center, if our students aren't kind of anchored in some sort of, this is the takeaway, this is what I'm completing, this is the artifact, this is the exit ticket, it can be a little amoebus and the structure can be a little helter-skelter wonky, and then kids aren't really getting the high value that they could out of the center because they might just be kind of like hanging out and chilling. So always have some sort of artifact, whether that is a reflection journal, whether that is an exit ticket, whether that is something that they're turning in, whether that is a graphic organizer, whatever it is, make sure that they have something that they're bringing with them through the centers, or turning in at the end of the center, or leaving in a pile, or turning into you, whatever routine you want to have with that. There needs to be some sort of artifact that says, this is what I was doing for the past 10 to 15, maybe even 20 minutes. So make sure you think through that with your students. I like a journal because it feels like a little more formative, I guess. And so it's not something necessarily that you're grading for accuracy. It just gives kids an opportunity to be metacognitive and talk about their learning. So I like a journal, but an exit ticket definitely could work, especially if you're really drilling down on a skill. And then the next thing that you want to think about is having some sort of center monitor, some sort of center guide. I always had, a student who they knew it was their job. Like, in this group of 4, you're the center manager, whatever that looks like. So that means you're making sure the center, when you leave the center, it has all the materials for the next group. You're making sure that everybody stays on task, whatever that is. It's a great leadership opportunity for our students. So think through who will be kind of your center manager, whatever you want to make it. It could be fun. Give them a little badge. I don't know. There's a lot of fun things that you can do with it, but make sure that kids know that they're really taking ownership over how it goes. And then give them an opportunity to reflect on the center. After we did centers, we always had a community circle. How did that go? Like, what are some strengths? What were some weaknesses of that activity? What would we like to do differently next time? And so it gives kids a moment to kind of step back and think like, how did I do in that center? And that is much more powerful than just saying that they did poorly or saying that they did really well. Is helping them realize how they did and take ownership over their own learning. So make sure you add some sort of follow up or wrap up after the centers have gone through. And then, your role is going to be different depending on how you organize your centers. For me, I always felt like centers were an opportunity to really lean into differentiation because I had kids that were 4 and 5 grade levels apart in math. And so I was like, how am I going to make this happen? And centers were my solution. So I was always with a set group of students while they were rotating and supporting them through what they were doing, or I might be doing some sort of direct instruction. So if you're doing it like that, remember that means you won't be around to go to the centers and see what the other kids are doing. So it's so important that you have that trust, that you practice the routines, that you build that, because it is going to be different for kids to recognize like, oh, wait, my teacher's sitting all the way over there and I'm all the way over here on this side of the room. Like maybe I could do a little something else, right? So you have to really build that skill for them, especially if you're not going to be going between the centers. Some of you might have an instructional aide, or maybe you have a 2-teacher classroom and then one person is able to go around. That's great, but you don't have to have that necessarily. So those are just some things to think through when you're thinking about this center. Like any procedure, it needs to be rolled out. There need to be norms, expectations. It needs to be practiced. And you need to give kids an opportunity to reflect and talk about how they did so they can continue to get better at the skill of actually being in these collaborative centers together. Now, something I have not talked about yet is actually that centers are a great opportunity to honor our gifted students, but also just give kids a push. I think when we talk about differentiation, understandably, the first thing that we start to think about is creating access points for our students that need that are missing some of the skills, right? Like, oh, differentiation is an opportunity to get those kids that are 2-3 grade levels behind into the learning that we're doing right now. That's not the only people that need to be differentiated for, though. You do have your students that are like high flyers, is what we would call them in the district. Every other district has a name, or like your gifted students, whatever that looks like. You do have those students that also deserve to have like content that is meeting their needs. And it doesn't, if you have gifted students, it doesn't always mean just like giving them the next grade level ahead. Sometimes it's just deeper engagement with the subject. And so I love to have what I call a push center. And I didn't call it that with the kids because I didn't want them to internalize in their minds that it was out of their reach, because it wasn't just for the gifted students, it was for everybody. But I would have a push center, which is a center that has like a head scratcher, a problem. I would get problems, like especially in math, I would get word problems from like other curriculums that I knew were really inquiry based, or like that took a lot of like deep thinking, whether I was using like illustrative mathematics, or I was using, a more complex word problem, or sometimes I would use grade level content from the grade level above. And that was the push center. And it was a very low stress situation because kids knew like, hey, it's not a do or die situation with this work. I'm just doing my best in this center. And it gives kids an opportunity to just do something a little fun. And so I'm talking a lot about, how you can have your kids doing the skill building during centers. Like you can have them doing those foundational skills that they're missing during centers, but you can also have a push center for kids to just explore a little bit deeper. And so that's something that I would also recommend just making available in centers. Another reason why centers are so powerful, because you can really make sure that every student is getting a little something that they need. And so think about incorporating that kind of center in ELA. It could look like a high interest book that they can read that's maybe above their grade level. I mean, I have kids all the time that are maybe 4th, 5th grade, and they're interested in some of these YA novels that are technically a higher grade level, but they can still read them and be interested in them. So consider adding that push center, whatever structure you pick, because it's a great way to challenge our students, and they will definitely surprise you with what they're able to do. All right, y'all, that is a wrap for our conversation today, all about centers. Let me know in the comments, do you already use centers? Are you going to use any of these tips? Are you thinking about implementing centers? I love centers as a way to not only be culture responsive, but also to differentiate and just to kind of spice it up in the classroom. So try these out. Like I said, don't overwhelm yourself. Just start with one subject, one day a week, and then kind of build up from there. But if you also are thinking about, I don't know if my classroom community is quite there yet with how we're conducting ourselves to support centers, remember that I did write a book all about building a classroom community. Just saying, it's here for you. So check it out if you want more strategies about just how to create that classroom culture of joy. And it's available like Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, that kind of thing. And I will have links below so that you can just pick it up. But yeah, that is all about centers. If you're not already subscribed here and following along on our little journey, please make sure that you are. And if you love teacher tips like this, hopefully you follow us over on Instagram and you're part of our community and receiving the Equitable Educator newsletter. And that is a newsletter every Monday that has tips and strategies as well. So like I said, let me know in the comments, are you using centers? And what topic should we talk about next on That's Just Good Teaching? All right, y'all. Thanks. Bye.